अस्सलाम वालेकुम। द नॉर्थ पल्स की एक और एपिसोड में आपको खुशामदीद। आज हमारे साथ डॉक्टर मुनीर शेख साहब हैं, जो कि इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी के एक्सपर्ट हैं। डेटा एनालिसिस पे उनका अबूर है। He has worked as chief statistician in the past. He has also worked in the Privy Office, as well as at the Ministry of Finance. So today we are going to ask questions related to the situation which is created um, by the levying of tariffs on Canadian imports to the US by the Mr. Trump. And we will ask what kinds of policies are more useful in current times, and what is going to be the impact of these tariffs on Canada and on the US and overall on the world economy. So let's get started. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Munir Sheikh. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. We had wonderful conversation last week. We had very good reviews. People liked, knowing more about you. Today, I invited you as someone who know about the economics, about the data analysis, etc. So, would you please tell us that whatever is Mr. Trump's rationale about tariff, that it is levied because US was subsidizing Canada's imports in the past, and they want to stop subsidizing our imports to the US. What do you think? Is this valid rationale?
Absolutely not. Let me give you an example so people can begin to understand what we're talking about here. Suppose you go and buy a car and you pay the dealership $30,000. They get the money, you take the car, you come home. What would you think of that dealer if he starts to scream that there's something definitely wrong and that dealer is subsidizing you? I mean, if it doesn't make any sense in that example, because that is a trade deficit, it doesn't make any sense in the case of the US. If you actually do any analysis on subsidies, I think the evidence would show that if there is a subsidizer, it is Canada subsidizing the US, not the other.
Yeah, exactly.
And so Mr. Trump has latched on to all kinds of explanations, from fentanyl to subsidies, to Canada taking undue advantage of the US, making Canada the 51st state. I mean, all of that is, as our new prime minister has said, it really is all crazy and doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and his another claim is basically because he want to support local manufacturing, and he want to support local industry, and that's why he's more towards having nationalistic approach, which is not wrong, of course. He has all the rights to think about his population. But at the same time, in the past, we always learned that when you open doors and borders, your economies grow because you specialize in those fields, in those products where you have a competitive advantage. That's what international trade is all about, right? But now, again, his notion is that he's promoting tariff because he want to promote local manufacturing. So what do you think? What is the statistical evidence which you are aware of, and would you support this or would you challenge this? What do you think about it?
The developments in economics over the past 200 years, I mean, it goes back 200 years, have all led to the conclusion that this mercantilist policy of trying to produce everything yourself, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not only economically bad, it also is logically flawed. You can't produce everything yourself. Like, take a rich man, and if he says, I am going to do everything myself, you see how silly that is? Similarly, a rich country like the US saying, I am going to do everything myself, is just plain stupid.
Yeah.
So why is it really bad economics? And I should mention to you that the first country to understand that this was not a right approach was the US itself, which set up the international trading system, led it, and ensured that every other country follows it, because they understood 80 years ago that such a policy is a win-win proposition for the US and for everybody else. So we have a president here who, if I didn't see it myself, I would have said he is 278 years old, living in the past, and doesn't know that things have moved on from there. So I'll give you a Canadian example. Manufacturing in Canada, and you compare it to mining and utilities. Mining and utilities are 3 times more productive than manufacturing, which means that a person working in mining and utilities for the same time that that person would spend in manufacturing is producing 3 times more output.
Yeah.
Take a look at oil and gas, for example, it's 6 times more. If you look at pipeline, construction, it is 9 times more. So by shifting resources in the US from more productive users to manufacturing, uh, their productivity would fall and America is going to become poorer, and the standard of living in the US is going to fall, which is for a reversal of all the good work that the US has done internationally over the past 80 years, as I said. Uh, I'm shocked that, the American uh, intelligentsia knows all that. But what is shocking is that nobody has been able to get through to him. In effect, this article in the Wall Street Journal that our Prime Minister actually even quoted in his last speech to Canadians, according to the Wall Street, it is the dumbest policy that you can think of all.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's
Now, yeah, I mean, that's so true. But I'm having two questions over here, if we can address that a little bit. Number one, you mentioned that he's an old person himself, but he's living in the past, etc. Um, but his team is not that old, basically. The vice president is not that old. Elon Musk himself is not old. And similarly, other people around him, they are not as old as he himself is. Which means that he has strong influence on young people, on the youth as well. So how to see that, number one, and how he was able to convince everybody about his team, and not only his team, but also he got a big, he is in power with the large majority. Like it's not a minority government, it's quite strong government, right? This is my number one question. And number two, what I'm thinking is that, are you aware of any disruptive policies in the past which worked? Like there are always some people who want to break the norms and want to do things differently. So if you know a little bit about what has happened in the last 100 years or 200 years, what do you think at any time in the history when disruptive policies did work or they never worked, that kind of thing?
First, your question about everybody following him.
Yeah.
What I meant when I said 278 years old, I wasn't talking about his physical age. I was talking about him living in the past.
Yeah.
The reason that everybody is following him is simply because he had the American public behind him at the time of the election. So then you ask the question, why was the American public behind him?
Exactly.
Everybody may have their own explanations. My simple explanation is that the Americans came to the conclusion when he was the president the first time around that they needed to replace him. So he was defeated in the next election.
Yeah.
But the Americans saw what a terrible job the Democrats had done,
Mm,
especially Mr. Biden.
right.
And, you know, when they looked at that and they said, well, Kamala Harris is going to be a continuation of Joe Biden,
Yeah,
being Joe Biden, who was a disaster, and Donald Trump, who was there before him,
right.
uh,
That was a better time, so
Trump
that's
is
why.
probably better.
That makes sense, yeah.
And they didn't realize that the Trump they're going to get isn't the Trump they had before. And so this person now is completely without any constraints on himself. And that is my explanation.
Right.
The second
Yeah.
question you asked is there any time in history that this thing actually worked?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it works at a time when you are not actually able to get the market economy to work,
Mm-hmm.
and you need some kind of a protection for your own entrepreneurs uh, to start something. And so you put a huge tariff to allow your producers to develop their skills to compete with the rest of the world. And once they do that, then you get rid of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the situation we are in right now. I mean,
Mm.
Americans are the richest developed country in the world, and they don't
Exactly.
need to be protected from anybody to compete with anybody else.
Mm.
And so this move away from the US to countries like China, India is a voluntary thing,
Mm-hmm.
because, as I said earlier, that increases your productivity and living standards.
Yeah.
And and so it really isn't at all a situation like that. I can think of countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, protecting some sectors temporarily,
Right.
so they'll be able to compete in the future.
Yeah.
But it's all temporary. And this
Exactly.
thing that Mr. Trump is trying to do isn't a temporary thing, it's a
No.
permanent thing he wants to do.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so now whatever he's thinking, because they are also, stopping financing many of the projects which are happening in the educational institutions as well. So it's like as if whatever people were used to think is most important thing for their development, like the investment in education, investment in research and development, he's some sort of against all of that educational environment. And he thinks, I don't know what he thinks, maybe living in the past. I agree with you. But now that's some sort of reality, even if it is not 100% levied, all the tariffs, but part of them they are levied, or they will be levied, or I don't know what is going to happen. It's such an uncertain situation. But if we see its impact on Canadian economy, what do you think? Will we be able to survive even with the tariffs?
Everybody survives. That's
Okay, yeah, that's
everybody's
good.
going to survive.
Yeah,
Canada is going to be still going to be around. People are going to be still here. They're going to go to work. So survival isn't really the issue. I think the real issue is that our incomes are going to fall and our standard of living is going to uh, fall quite substantially.
yeah,
But as I was arguing earlier, it is also going to fall in the US, and it's also going to fall in Europe and everywhere else. So everyone is going to become poorer because of what he's doing. The impact on us is going to be much bigger than other countries because we are the closest trading partner that the US has. So obviously, we are going to be affected more.
yeah,
So that really is the unfortunate outcome, that our standard of living is going to fall. I should also mention that our productivity, which is the foundation for our living standard, has been really bad for the last decade or 2 decades. That is obviously not a consequence of Mr. Trump. It is a consequence of the bad things we have been doing to ourselves.
mm,
And so, to my mind, the tariff is the second worst thing that's going to happen to us. Our loss of productivity is the first the bad thing that is happening to us. And so, starting with a weak position already, this thing is going to hurt us even more. And so we need to focus upon how do we actually increase our productivity and how do we deal with the Trump shock uh, to stop the further deterioration in our productivity.
Okay, that's quite scary. I must say that you mentioned that income will fall, and I was learning that around 400,000 jobs might be at stake because of tariff. Unemployment rate is going to increase. So even if we will be living, but our lifestyle, as you mentioned, our lifestyle is going to be affected. And that is, I agree with you, because of many policies which we had in the past. For example, in my mind, it's like during COVID, we were giving out money a lot to people, but there was no production going on at the time. Everything was in lockdown situation, right? So if our economics says if we have more money and less production, what will happen? There will be high inflation, right? So and now again, government is hoping to subsidize all of those businesses which are going to be affected by tariff. They are going to give out unemployment insurance kind of thing to all of those who are laid off, for example. So again, I see a lot of money circulating around with less production overall. So I'm wondering, already we have a huge deficit. We have high debt overall, and we will be increasing to all of that. And I'm saying this because at this time, again, it seems like Carney got a momentum, and Carney might be in the race. There is going to be a tight race during the elections, and elections might be called very soon. As soon as this Sunday, they might be called. That's what we learned. My point is, what kinds of policies do you suggest to Canada to have where we enhance or improve production, but with less inflation or with less issues with deficit, with debt, etc.? So what kinds of policies, specific policies?
So let's make sure we understand the problem to start with. This shock, the economic shock, is going to cut down on our production. It is going to lead people to be unemployed. So we're going to have a weaker, smaller economy. So two questions arise. There are going to be people as a result who are going to suffer quite a bit. And so it is an equity question. What does the government do to help out these people? And that is a question of redistribution of income from those who can afford it, from future generations to current generation, to borrowing deficits. But that is a redistribution issue. And the government in the past has done it and should do that again in the future, that those who really do need help, they should be provided that help, even though it leads to borrowing and it leads to sacrifices for everybody. But obviously that doesn't grow our production. It really is a question of redistribution. The second part is, how are we going to grow our production? And that is something where you actually need to craft policies very carefully. People have talked about solutions like removing interprovincial trade barriers. Good idea, but it's going to take time. My preference is to do something really fast, and the really fast thing I have on my mind is that the government should cut taxes on business. Because businesses are going to get hit because of the tariff. And if they are not able to lower their costs, everybody is going to suffer. So the best way to lower their cost is to cut their taxes.
Exactly.
Now, why is that a good thing? It is a good thing because, to start with, our businesses pay taxes which are substantially higher than the businesses in the US. So we are uncompetitive to start with.
I know.
And this thing is going to make things worse. So let's level the playing field and use the business tax as a tool to to ensure that businesses can cope with this challenge and keep the workers that they need to keep and lower their prices so they can be more competitive. So that is what I would do right away.
Right.
Business taxes as much as you need to, at least to a level which is the same as the US and maybe even lower.
Right.
So in addition to redistribution policies, doing all these good things like interprovincial trade barriers, we need to do something relatively fast. And that would be my suggestion, cut business.
Right. As you mentioned, very rightly so, that because of taxes, the cost of investment is so high, and that's why we see a lot of capital flight to the US or other parts of the world, and people don't want to invest in Canada because of high taxes. So maybe that could be a solution towards that.
Let me actually mention to you some data which might shock your viewers.
Okay.
Canada has invested outside our borders $2.1 trillion. We have invested abroad, and the rest of the world has invested in Canada $1.3 trillion. So we are a net exporter of funds outside Canada. Canada-US comparison. I mean, this is there's such a misperception that the Americans are allowing us to run our country by giving us money. We have invested $1.1 trillion in the US itself, and they have invested $630 billion here, a ratio of 1 to 2. So we are the ones who are sending them money to help them grow their economy. And why do we do that? Well, we do that because we are taxing our own businesses to death. And you need to reverse that. You want to make sure that our businesses can compete so we can invest our own money in this country and not abroad.
That's right. Even Carney's, own business, they shifted their headquarters to the US. So you can imagine how many jobs are lost and how much money went out of Canada. So we are going to continue this conversation. I'm asked to take a short break. We'll see you soon.
अगर आपको दुबई या मिडिल ईस्ट नुमा जेवरात की तलाश है, तो आपको दूर जाने की बिल्कुल जरूरत नहीं। आज ही हमारे मिसिसागा रिजवे स्टोर तशरीफ लाइए, अल करम ज्वेलर्स। हमारे पास सोने के बेहतरीन कंगन, कड़े, झुमके, हार और सोने के सेट्स भी दस्तयाब हैं। शादी हो या मेहंदी या कोई भी फंक्शन, आपकी पसंद के तमाम जेवरात आपको हमारे स्टोर में मौजूद मिलेंगे। आज ही हमारे स्टोर पर तशरीफ लाइए, अल करम ज्वेलर्स, 3465 प्लैटिनम ड्राइव, यूनिट 99, मिसिसागा, या फिर कॉल करें 905-828-0009। अल करम ज्वेलर्स, फरमाइश आपकी, गारंटी हमारी।
HK Movers, home, offices, apartments and delivery, big or small, we move it all.
HK Movers.
Local and long distance. We also ship cars, Keller transport and moving services.
For service with a smile, give us a call.
Call Mr. Harminder 416-524-6704.
416-524-6704 पे.
Visit 140 Advance Boulevard, Unit number 10, Brampton.
Long distance moving specialist.
HK Movers. HK Movers.
Welcome back. So let's continue our discussion with Dr. Munir Sheikh. Sir, would you tell us now, for next 5 minutes, I would like to focus on specifics for our, viewers who buy goods and services. So do you have any idea like what kinds of goods are going to be more expensive, such as what kinds of food is going to be more expensive, or what we should do to not increase our budget, our family budget, our household budget? Anything in that direction?
Well, let me make a simple observation, which is that given the nature of this policy, everything is going to become more expensive. And so this task of trying to find things which are less expensive than the other is going to be a really challenging task. And let me explain why. We are going to pay more because of our own tariffs. When our government puts tariffs on American goods, they're going to become more expensive. What are those goods? For example, all kinds of food, appliances, clothing, computers, paper products, tools, you name it, and there's going to be a tariff on $60 billion worth of goods. So there are going to be direct increases in prices as a result of that. But then we also have tariffs on aluminum and steel, which are intermediate goods. So any place where aluminum and steel is used, its cost is going to go up and its price is going to go up. So that is a secondary channel through which prices will rise, and they'll rise almost everywhere. But a bigger shock is going to be the decline in the value of the Canadian dollar.
Would you please repeat that? I did not hear. Decline in what?
The value of the Canadian dollar.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is going to drive costs up everywhere. Imagine, for example, a person goes to Pakistan, the plane ticket is going to cost more. This person wants to go and have a meal at a restaurant in Lahore. That meal is going to cost more because the Canadian dollar's value has gone down.
Exchange.
Everything is going to go down. It doesn't matter where a Canadian goes, they are going to face higher prices. So my view would be because of all these factors, everything is going to cost more. And so we should be.
So with respect to this depreciation of Canadian dollar, what do you think, is there any role of monetary policy here in Canada? Like the Bank of Canada should be protecting or should be pegging to some extent, or not letting Canadian dollar fall to that level? So is there any place for monetary policy here?
No.
Okay.
For the longest of times, we have not, or the Bank of Canada hasn't had the value of the Canadian dollar as a target. And that's thanks to a brilliant economist many, many years ago, Robert Mundell, who was a Canadian, who talked about the value of flexible exchange rates. And so we were the first country to go on a flexible exchange rate. Everybody else followed us. Here's a great Canadian who told the world what to do. So we have an exchange rate which is driven by the market, and the only focus that the Bank of Canada has is to keep the inflation rate around 2%. And that is the right policy, and that is the policy they're going to follow. It's not a target that they want to achieve on a daily basis. It's a target which they try to achieve on a reasonable time frame. So there are going to be situations where they face a huge trade-off, like right now. If the economy is going to be weak and inflation will go up. So that's a really tough spot for the bank to be in. And the governor has said very clearly that the bank does not have the tools one would need to deal with both these challenges.
I see.
So he'll be using monetary policy quite judiciously to ensure that the inflation rate comes down to the 2% target over a reasonable time frame.
Okay. So it seems to me, you mentioned that the government should cut taxes on businesses. So if they cut taxes on businesses, but at the same time, they need to give out some sort of money to people because people are not going to have enough to live their life. So we are talking about a highly expansionary policy. I don't know where the overall structure will go. Maybe for this 1 year or two, they need to rely on such policies, and then they need to revise and have some other strategy later on. That's what you're suggesting, right?
Yeah, this is the right use of fiscal policy. When the economy is weak, you run deficits. When the economy is strong, you run surpluses.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, governments have found it useful to follow good economic policies when the economy is in a weak state.
Yeah.
But the other part, to eliminate the deficit and run surpluses when the economy is in good shape, they somehow seem to forget that, and so we have a pile up of debt. So the right policy be to fund all deficits which are for an operating purpose, not for investment. Over time through surpluses. So you run a balanced budget, and then fund your investments, government investment, through borrowing.
Right.
I think that the new Prime Minister has that in mind. He talked a bit about that earlier, but I think we need to move on to that new anchor for our fiscal policy because we have been really irresponsible in the past as to how we do fiscal policy.
Yeah. No matter how irresponsible they were, what comes to mind is that this is not a time to think about deficit or debt or not. It's more about how to stay alive somehow, or how to stay productive, or what kinds of policies will keep the economy going forward, right? So that has to be the focus. Thank you so much for all of this conversation. Unfortunately, we always run out of time, and at the end, I would like to give you some time to talk about your book, which is an amazing book on Islamabad, A Tale of War and Love. If you tell our viewers what is exciting about it, so they buy and start reading. The book is available on Amazon.ca as well as Amazon.com. It's very interesting book. I'm sure many people will like it, but I will appreciate Dr. Munir Sheikh if you say a few words about this book.
Well, as I was mentioning briefly last time, this is a book with a theme that bad governments really hurt their own people. They can destroy the lives of their own citizens. This is based on a pretty tough period in Pakistan from September 65 to December 2007. Really tough period in Pakistan's history, but it's a universal theme. And I am really quite concerned that if the US government doesn't change course, it may turn out to be a bad government, which is going to affect the lives of its own citizens. Of course, they're going to hurt us even more, but that is the theme, and I would suggest people to read it so they get an impression as to how things can go downhill from the actions that their governments take.
Okay, wonderful. It's so relatable in current times as well, everywhere, whichever country. Although your characters are from Pakistan, but basically it's a universal, topic on which you wrote.
It is.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on this program twice, consecutively, and we really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, viewers, for being with us. And I hope to see you next week. It's still Ramadan time. I hope you guys are having, good time to connect with God and to connect with our values and to our roots. And please remember us in your prayers. Thank you so much.